Welcome, Jet fans, to another episode of the Jets Life podcast. We're 6 days away until the NFL draft, and Joe Douglas has had a press conference today. Just go over the current state of the team, um, not give his overall draft strategy. I have reached a point in my life where these conversations are as pointless as possible, but it is good to kind of hear more or less just some sort of idea of what's going on, within those walls. A lot of questions going into the draft. Obviously, I think we all have reached that point in time where we do understand at some point in time the Jets are going to just draft an offensive player with their first pick, whether it be a move up, a move back, stick and pick. Regardless, that will be most likely the Jets draft strategy going into the draft. Before we get started, want to let you know you can please just help me out grow my channel, like and subscribe. That helps me immensely. So you can take a few moments here, hit the like button at the bottom of the screen. It'd be a huge help for me. So yeah, as I just mentioned, you know, the first thing, and Joe Douglas did obviously bring this up a little bit. I don't understand why, if they have a press conference, it doesn't get released. While he's speaking, they do it for Robert Saleh, so the technology exists in that building. But for whatever reason, the full press conference does not become available. But we do get, luckily enough, through different media outlets, little snippets of Joe Douglas's conversations, and there was one here on the willingness to trade up, trade back. Um, there are a number of elite players in this draft. I think we all eyeball the top playmakers at the top of the draft: Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze, Joe Alt kind of fits into that mold of a player you could potentially trade up for. I don't think the Jets would necessarily trade up for Alt because he's in my opinion, the best offensive lineman in this draft. But the Jets do need eventually that middle round pick to go after another wide receiver if they do end up picking an offensive lineman in the first round. So I don't see that being the best strategy, to trade up for an offensive lineman when you still need another pass catcher. So that's my thought there. The trade up scenario I think would only make sense if one of these playmakers, mainly Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors, one of those guys tends to fall. I think the Jets would be willing to trade up to maybe the five or six slot, maybe even as low as seven. Although I don't think both or any of the receivers, Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. That is, would make it past six with the Giants. If by chance one of them is available at seven, I think the Jets would be more than willing to try and make that move. But seven is another ideal spot after Malik Neighbors goes. If the Jets are honed in on we want a pass catcher, Romo Dunze would be that third option there. But you never know really the way this draft shakes out. It's always crazy every single year. I mean, a couple of years ago, going into the draft, I think many of us, with very few people, had Derek Stingley being the top corner in that draft. And yet, going down the draft board, third pick comes in, the first corner is taken, and it's Derek Stingley, leaving the Jets with the option of Sauce Gardner, who, again, many of us believed would be the top corner taken. And even in that same draft, a lot of people had, um, you know, Garrett Wilson, although it was more spread out. There was a lot of Drake London fans in that draft too. But I think a gross majority of us probably assumed that Garrett Wilson would be the first receiver taken, and it wasn't the case. He ended up being available for the Jets in that draft as well. So again, we all have our draft boards. We're all looking at the mock drafts, and a lot of similar trends are there. Top three picks being quarterbacks. I do believe that to be the case. JJ McCarthy falling somewhere between the fourth and sixth pick is usually what we're seeing. But then again, we also believed Will Levis last year was going to be a top 10 pick, and he got picked in the second round. So you just really never know, especially when there's quarterbacks at the top of the draft. You just never know the way the board's actually going to shake out. I do strongly believe the top three picks will be quarterbacks, and I think that's why that JJ McCarthy train has kind of skyrocketed himself into a top 10 pick. That doesn't mean he won't be. There are a lot of quarterback needy teams. You look at Denver, you look at Oakland, you look at Minnesota, you look at the Giants. There's plenty of teams there where JJ McCarthy could definitely go, and it's possible. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of smoke in these scenarios. The only people that really know what's going on are these teams that are picking in these spots. So again, I mean, I'd be more than happy to see JJ McCarthy go in top 10. Hell, even Bo Nix squeeze in there as well. That would be outstanding because we all know Jets are not picking a quarterback in this draft, at least in the first round, that is. So the more quarterbacks that get picked in the top five, top 10, the better it is. That means that we're going as we stand right now. Three quarterbacks definitely going to go. That means one of the top seven players, non-quarterbacks that are one of the top seven players are going to be there for the Jets. The more quarterbacks that go, that number obviously shrinks down a little bit. If a team like the Giants picks a quarterback, that's a team that you pencil in as a receiver right now. Um, that's one of those teams that you pencil in a receiver for that's going to make another receiver drop. So that's a scenario where potentially, Malik Neighbors could potentially pass the Giants at 6. But I just don't see that happening. I think the Giants do end up picking a receiver. A lot of money invested in Daniel Jones. It just makes more sense to go with wide receiver, although his health issues are a concern. So again, all is to say, we don't know anything. We can just look at mock drafts, make our best predictions with that, and just hope for the best. We all just hope that Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't rub the first 9 teams the right way and ends up being there for the Jets at 10. Doubt that happens. Very unlikely, but would be absolutely outstanding if one of these top 2 guys was able to be there at 10. So again, Joe Douglas did talk to the media today, and there was a few conversations there that I was able to pick up on. Not so much so that you know we were able to kind of really share too much, but there were a few snippets that out there. I'll go with one non-draft conversation. It's a weird conversation that we're still having here, but the whole Zach Wilson dilemma. I think we've all reached the point in time where we understand that he's likely gone at some point. When that happens, who knows? But JD obviously trying to bring up Zach's value says he is an asset, but we are open to trading him. I think that we are open to trading him has kind of changed a little bit over the past few months. It would seem like it was a foregone conclusion he'd be gone. I just don't think there are enough teams in the bucket right now that are willing to trade for Zach Wilson, knowing how awful he's been in his first few years as a Jet quarterback. So it just really puts the Jets in a rough situation. They have a guy making $10 million. If they trade him, they could save $5 million. And then releasing him does no benefit at all. So it really doesn't make sense to keep to release him. If you're going to pay him anyway, might as well keep him on the roster. Practice squad him if you need to, or practice squad is still same as a cut, but I guess he would have to be on the 53-man roster. So how they work you know, their gymnastics around there, would they be willing to release him and take a $10 million hit? It just makes no sense from a saving standpoint why you would do that unless they pick a quarterback in the middle rounds. I think fourth round would be the earliest that can happen. That's a scenario where I guess you could see the Jets cutting bait with Zach Wilson and taking the full cap hit for it. Um, or maybe they're waiting to see what happens in this draft. If there's a quarterback needed team that doesn't get lucky enough to draft one of these quarterbacks in the top of the draft, do they then pivot and get Zach Wilson? I don't think that's the best scenario for any team. I think if you're bringing Zach Wilson in, you're bringing him developmentally. We all looked at like the Rams, Chiefs as being options that made sense because they obviously have their quarterback one at the moment. They have offensive minded coaches that could have potentially groomed him in their manner and kind of given a year, see where it's like, um, and make decisions after that. Obviously, Chiefs would not be making any decisions with the assumption that he would be a future quarterback. They had their guy, but it seemed like the Rams, Matthew Stafford's a little older, has battled through some injuries the last couple of years, so an option there would have made some sense. They've done some wonders with quarterbacks on limited snap counts. We saw a few years last 2 years ago when they brought in Baker Mayfield. Within 2 days, he was leading a game-winning drive on a Thursday night football game. So, um, you know, I just think this is just one of their ways of trying to just show he has some value It just I don't see a scenario here for Zach Wilson where he's you know traded to a team. I just don't see it anymore. Very few teams out there that have a backup quarterback need that Zach Wilson would would fill the need for. So that's really all I'd say there. I don't think there's much to it. They're trying to trade him. They're not having any luck finding a good trade partner. Um, Unless the Jets are willing to kind of stamp a higher draft pick to get like a lower draft pick in return, just to get that additional cap savings. But that kind of look, looks bad from a GM standpoint. So I don't see that not happening either. But that's really the only situation I can really see where a team would be willing to do something like this. Um, so yeah, that's kind of where I stand with the whole Zach Wilson news. Another big topic here, and it's been a big topic around Jets Twitter, or I guess Jets X is what we're calling it. I know it's been for months or close to a year since the whole Twitter X change or whatever it is. I don't know. It's still Jets Twitter to me. I'm not going to change just because the website changed. But anyway, um, Brock Bowers obviously a lot of us kind of have been on one end of the Brock Bowers to the Jets kind of conundrum or whatever you want to call it. Um, so for the Brock Bowers guys, or as they've been dubbed, the Bowers boys, would like to hear. The Jets are in the world of if the right type of tight end available, um, they can definitely make the pick. So Joe Douglas did have this conversation, and there was a snip put on social media on this. So when Joe Douglas made this comment, he did start to bring up later round tight ends. He talked about Kansas City. He talked about San Francisco. He talked about Sam Laporta. Just talked about the tight ends there and how dynamic they make the offense. And when you really look around the NFL, the good offenses have a tight end in there. So it definitely is a situation where you look at rosters and it does change the framework of an offense. When there's a tight end on the field that teams are afraid of being a dynamic player, it does kind of change things around overall. Makes things a little wild because it's very difficult to cover a solid tight end. Um, with that being said, they did list tight ends later in the rounds. The one caveat I would say to that, um, personally, I think that Brock Bowers would be the option if the top receivers are gone. That's again Harrison Jr., Neighbors, Odunze. Um, Brian Thomas has gotten a lot of, you know, acceleration here, but again, I think that's just a nature of the way that this draft board's falling. If all the receivers are gone, a lot of teams try and increase the value of the next guy to try and milk a potential trade. So maybe there's something to that there. Would the Jets pick Brock Bowers over a true outside type of wide receiver, whether it be a slot guy or whatever? I think Bowers. I mean, if you had to put me in a spot, I think he would be the fourth option from the pass catcher standpoint. Very close though behind would be Brian Thomas to me. I think he's a little undervalued. We're all eyeballing these top three guys, but I think he's right up there with the rest of these guys. So it'd be very interesting to see what the Jets do here. I do think that there's value in the tight end from Joe Douglas's perspective. There are people out there that just kind of honed in on the fact that he brought up late round guys, but there's video evidence from last year's draft where Joe Douglas was, you know, about to make the pick or whatever it was. I forget exactly what it was. I think it was around the time where Broderick Jones got traded, or the trade up for Broderick Jones happened, and Joe Douglas was going through his list, and I forget the three names, but I do remember Michael Meyer was on there, and obviously Will McDonald was on that list because that's who that Jets ended up picking. I forget who the third guy was. Um, Maybe it was Van Ness. If he was still on there, I forget. Don't quote me on anything on that, but I do know Meyer was there, which tells us that the Jets were considering a tight end at the 15th pick. Why not also consider a tight end at the 10th pick when this guy is a guy that we're talking about being worlds better than a guy like Michael Meyer? So it's just definitely something that we need to kind of grow some acceptance to because it is possible. It's not like it's not going to happen. There's definitely a possibility of it happening. Whether or not it does, we'll find out in 6 days, just like a lot of other questions. Um, Continuing down, I don't know exactly the quote. This is one that I kind of um, tried to research a little bit here. Um, but the whole fifth year option type of situation on AVT, um, this is something that was brought up a little bit here on uh, during the Joe Douglas press conference. I don't know what the exact quote was. I'm trying to still locate it, but apparently, um, and Antoine Staley is the one that kind of put it out there. Apparently, there's um, it's not an actual slam dunk to give AVT the fifth year option. I know the Jets have until I believe it's like May 2nd or something like that to make that to exercise that option. Um, my thought here, I think the Jets will exercise the option, and I think the reason for not displaying it publicly is kind of a smoke and mirror type of situation. You're trying not to paint your strategy to the whole world, so maybe they're just waiting on after the first round, see how the board falls. Don't make a team believe that you're not going to pick an offensive lineman. L- Let's just throw this idea out there that the Jets do desperately want a wide receiver. Their only thing they want is a wide receiver. Um, Nothing else, just a wide receiver, and that's it. Um, which I believe is not the strategy. They will like to take the best player available, but I think we all know that it's most likely going to be a pass catcher. If you go into the draft with everyone knowing you have already exercised AVT's option, it does put that ringer out there that the Jets are probably not going to pick an offensive lineman. They still could if they exercise this option. That doesn't mean they won't, but it does put those feelers out there. Okay, the Jets have a good majority of their offensive line stable for this coming season. They have an offensive lineman or three offensive linemen locked into the roster for next year. Maybe it doesn't put as big of a need to pick an offensive lineman with the 10th pick. So more and more teams will hone in on receivers and trade up there potentially over the Jets if need be. That is my thought here as potentially why they don't kind of display that. Joe Douglas, I think, historically has not exercised the fifth year option until after the draft. I think he did the same thing um, a couple years ago with the fifth year option for Quinnen. It happened after the draft, and that was a guy that they were definitely going to exercise anyway. But I do now I'm kind of trying to remember the kind of how those chips fell and everything. I think they did kind of say earlier on that it was going to happen. It was just a matter of the formality of it. So who knows the real reasoning why? Maybe they don't, and that would be kind of an interesting conversation for when they decline or if they decline. But I personally do believe that the fifth year option will be exercised, and AVT will be here for next year. The reason behind this, offensive guards have gotten paid out just outrageous this offseason. So when you have a good one, it's a good idea to bring him back, especially when it's on the fifth year option instead of potentially taking the risk of not exercising it and then having to re-sign him next year. Because that would be obviously a little more expensive. We saw what happened with the Giants. They did not exercise the fifth year option for Daniel Jones a couple of years ago. He had a great year, won a playoff game. They had to pay him $40 million a year. Whereas if they did exercise the option, I think that number was like around 22, 24 million, somewhere around there. So it cost the team $16 million in cap. Um, I don't think the Jets will make that mistake, but we'll see what happens once that window expires that they have to exercise the options. But that's overall like where we stand here. I've been kind of eyeballing seeing if anything else came out from the press conference, but I think we'll watch it at some point. They'll probably release it sometime tomorrow or later on this evening on their channel. But let me know what you guys think. I think this is kind of a good summary here of what kind of was said. Most importantly, the biggest thing I would say, Brock Bowers boys, stand up. There's a chance. Joe Douglas put it out there. Hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe. Have a great day, and let's go Jets.